Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fallon Wagner, and I am the digital content producer here at ATB Financial. I will be introducing our presenter today and moderating the question and answer portion. If you have any trouble with your connection throughout the presentation, you can try refreshing your browser. We'll also be recording our presentation today, and we'll send out a link for that along with a copy of the slides over the next couple of days to everyone who registered for today's session. The presentation itself should last approximately 50 minutes and we'll have around 10 minutes for Q&A thereafter. And feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat and we'll do our best to grab as many as we can in the time available. We're here today to chat with you about cybercrime trends and mitigation tactics for businesses in Alberta. So March is Fraud Prevention Month, but fraud is prevalent all year round. Today, you will learn more on how to protect your accounts and devices through easy-to-implement solutions and what to do if you think you're a victim of a cybercrime. Presenting today is Aisha Kitchlew, the Senior Manager for Fraud and Crime Prevention at ATB. Aisha's team supports clients by consulting on best processes and practices to protect your business from cyber attacks. As our presentation proceeds, we would encourage you to put any questions again in that chat function. And given that we only have an hour, again, we'll try to do our best to get to as many questions as possible. And with that, let's get started. Over to you, Aisha.
Perfect. Thanks, Fallon. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our fraud awareness presentation. We'll be talking about a wide range of topics related to fraud and cybercrime within our businesses and organizations. So thanks for being here today. Thanks for taking the time to join us and for helping us stay one step ahead of fraud. So just as a quick introduction to add to what Fallon has already said, my name is Aisha. I work in the Financial Crime and Compliance Unit at ATB, more specifically the Fraud and Cybercrime team for ATB Business. I do have over 10 years of experience in the fraud and cybercrime world of things, and every day actually it seems like there's so much more to share with everyone. So many new methods of fraud attacks, new red flags, new techniques, new ways that fraudsters are getting around our systems and circumventing the tools that we have in place. So I'm really happy to have a platform such as this that ATB can offer to our clients and just the general public on some of these learnings and education. So thanks again for being here. So we do have a lot of topics to cover today. If you've seen any of my past webinars, you know that we always like to go through the top trending frauds that we are seeing as a financial institution, as well as just what we've observed across the threat landscape in Alberta. Today, however, I will go through those, but I will be explaining the more sophisticated attacks that we are seeing. For example, under phishing, we won't go through the classic email phishing attacks that we see day in and out, but we will go through a variety of different techniques that fraud actors have created to phish Canadians and businesses across the globe. These include something we call search engine poisoning, business email compromise, or spear phishing. I'll also go through some non-conventional ways that we have seen fraudsters phish for your information. If you do want to learn more about the classic phishing emails and the red flags that those come with, please do take a look at my webinar from last year, where I go through some real-life email phishing examples and red flags. So I have linked the video at the end of this slide deck. After that, we'll go through check fraud, payment-related fraud, and then finally we'll talk about protection and mitigation measures for organizations to consider and implement in order to improve their overall cybersecurity postures. We'll talk about how to manage a cyber attack if you do fall victim and what to do after the fact. For those of you that are from nonprofit organizations, I also have a recorded webinar specific to this sector. So again, it will be linked at the end of this slide deck. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into it because we do have lots of topics to cover today. So first off, I want to share some stats with you. In 2023, 8.3% of e-commerce transactions, so online transactions, were targeted by suspected fraud attempts. There was a 202% increase in the volume of suspected digital or online fraud attempts from Canada between 2019 and 2023. And most importantly, 91% of successful cyber attacks started with phishing. And this is because, again, fraudsters have started to create more sophisticated ways to phish the public, pairing phishing with something that we refer to as social engineering, which I'll get into in a few minutes here. Under those who fell victim, half or more of them fell to some form of phishing, smishing, or vishing. Now, smishing is phishing through SMS text messages, and vishing is phishing through voice or phone calls. So you can see as a whole, phishing makes up a good chunk of the frauds reported. All right, so let's quickly introduce phishing as a whole. What is phishing? We all know that phishing is a technique used by fraud actors to manipulate an individual into divulging confidential and personal or company information. And again, how these phishing attacks are becoming more and more successful is through the use of what we call social engineering. When social engineering comes into play, the fraud actor is actually using your emotions, your fears, and your anxiety to work against you. So they want to worry you, or they want to excite you or rush you into making decisions such as clicking on links or providing information without thinking twice. Social engineering is a tactic that fraudsters use very successfully to manipulate, influence, or deceive a victim in order to gain control over your network, your device, or again, to steal that personal and confidential information that they're after. It uses psychological manipulation to trick users into making security mistakes or giving away that sensitive information. So for example, they'll use phrases like, click the link below, or the link below will expire in 24 hours, or they'll send you an email impersonating someone of higher authority within your organization, like a boss or a colleague, somebody on the board, asking you to do something, making you feel like you need to do it as soon as possible. So fraudsters are able to circumvent the tools and the security that you might have in place on your device by attacking the people of your organization through social engineering. Because we have access to such great tools and technologies that can stop most of the cyber crimes or attacks on a device level, fraudsters are now turning to the end users and getting them to do the work for them in order to get past all of the checkpoints that we may have in place. So now when we talk more about sophisticated approaches of phishing and social engineering, one thing that we have been combating is called search engine poisoning. So what happens here is that fraud actors aren't actually reaching out to you through email or text message. Rather, you are finding their planted phishing seed and responding to it. So a prime example of search engine poisoning are fake websites that will lure you into providing information like your login credentials, your online banking credential, your payment details, and things like that. So for example, if you're trying to book a flight and you use Google search to look for vacations to the Bahamas, the first result might be something like 50% off packages to all-inclusive resorts to the Bahamas. So you'll naturally want to click on that link, not knowing that it's actually a fake website that's acting like, it's providing flights through WestJet or Air Canada, and asking you to provide your payment details, your passport details, and all the other information that you would provide when booking flights or vacations. Another issue that we're having is that fraud actors have set up fake websites that target financial institutions. So they've created very good looking login pages for clients to log into their internet banking through. So using ATB Financial as an example, if you're someone that uses search engines to look for every page that you use, you may pull up your Google search and type in something like ATB login or ATB business login. At the top result, you may see something that says, ATB business login, click here. And without actually looking at that URL, you'll click on that link. From there, you enter your username, your password, and even your two-factor authentication code to log in. Now, if that page is malicious, you've just provided all of the key information required to log into your banking account and conduct fraud transactions to that fraud actor on the other end. Now, again, this is happening with all sorts of companies and organizations. It's not just banking. So there's travel sites that are being targeted, email accounts, retail websites, and many more. Now, these malicious websites not only ask you for your credentials, but what they can do is they can also poison Google Ads to drop malware or viruses into that website landing page. So if you visit the websites, the malware just does its work and will start to do its work right away, steal information like your passwords and even sometimes your cryptocurrency wallets. Fraud actors are actually paying for these ad services so that those malicious websites will show up as the top results when somebody is using a search engine like Google or Yahoo or whatever search engine you use to access pages of this nature. So the best way to protect yourself is to make sure you avoid putting personal financial information into any website without doing your research. So this can sound time consuming, but it is very easy to spot a malicious website if you just know what to look for. So some of the ways to identify these malicious websites are making sure the URL that you're clicking on belongs to the company. So for example, if you're using ATB to log into your banking website, take a look at the URL. What does the URL read? Is it something like atb.business.com/login? Is it atb.com/login? Or is it an unusually longer URL with additional characters or numbers in it that don't really match up to ATB Financial? Another red flag is that you may suddenly have pop-ups appear on your screen when you're on the malicious website, and those pop-ups will generally be asking you to download additional software or click on links, something along the lines of, you have a virus on your device, click here to scan now, but that type of thing. You want to make sure you also verify the security certificate of the website. So a really easy way to do this is to take a look at the URL and make sure it begins with HTTPS rather than just the http://www.atb.com. So you're looking for that S after the HTTP, and that indicates that the website has a security certificate, or what we know as an SSL certificate. You can also use apps to avoid the mistake of visiting a compromised website. Apple and Google generally do a good job in filtering the malicious apps out of their marketplaces. They can still slip through the cracks, so do be very careful, but banking apps are more secure than the desktop versions when they are used properly. You always want to make sure that you visit the main website of the company that you're trying to reach. So for example, go to www.atb.com, find the banking login page using that main ATB website, and then bookmark that page so that you're sure you're at the right place every time you want to log in. If you bank with other financial institutions, I would suggest look at your statement, look at your bank card, find that main website from there, go to that main website, navigate through to that login page, and bookmark each of those login page from there. And last but not least, do not ever provide that two-factor authentication passcode to anybody. So as an ATB business client, you know that each time you log in using your username and password, you are prompted for a two-factor authentication code that will come to your phone, the phone number that we have registered at ATB. Even if someone is calling you saying that they're from your bank, even if the caller ID suggests that they may actually be calling from the bank, if they're emailing you, texting you, calling you, do not ever give away that passcode. We have absolutely no use for that passcode. We will never ask for it. The only place that you will be asked for that is on the legitimate website after you've entered your credentials. So please know that it is your responsibility to protect that code just like you would protect your username and your password. Now, if you think you've accidentally clicked on a link, it might be malicious. Maybe you don't see that security certificate, for example. That might not always mean that you're on a malicious website, but if you have any doubts, just navigate away from the page, clear your browser history immediately, and start again. Okay, next up we have business email compromise. These are also known as spear phishing attacks. Most often, these types of phishing attacks will start off with a compromised email address or a spoofed email address for the fraud actor to use in order to pretend that they are somebody like a trusted vendor, a company executive, a colleague, a leader, and just generally somebody that you should trust. And because you trust them, it's easy for the fraud actor to convince you to give up things like financial authorization or confidential details about a business or an organization. This might include asking you to make wire transfers to a third party, diverting payroll, updating account information, but we'll go into some of that detail here shortly. So here's the sort of the flow of how a business email compromise works. Like I said, the first part is when the fraud actor will decide who they want to impersonate, who they want to pretend to be. So for example, an executive within your organization could be targeted with a phishing attack. And now the fraud actor has access to their email inbox. They have access to other useful business information that may be stored in that email inbox, and they will use all of that information in this attack. They'll do a lot of research in this step to understand exactly how your organization works, who the right people are with the right authorization to conduct transactions, to disclose information, to make changes and such. In the second step, the fraud actor will use that social engineering aspect in order to get the victim to complete an action on their behalf. So they will do this by convincing the employee. Sometimes the email will be marked as urgent, it will be marked as confidential, so that the victim can see, for example, an email coming from their executive. They'll think, this is marked as urgent, this is coming from my executive, they trusted me to do this, I'm going to go ahead and do this, and that's how it happens, and you fall victim without thinking twice. Another method that we see very often is that if a fraud actor has targeted an organization that you work with, so maybe it's a vendor that you order supplies from often, or water from, or anybody that you've worked with on a regular basis, what they'll do is the fraud actors will use their email credentials, and they'll send you an email asking you to update their account numbers for the next due invoice. And they will know the specifics of that invoice because, again, they are doing their research. So if they have access to that inbox, they'll be looking for things like outstanding invoices, upcoming payments, who usually the contact person is at your organization, and all sorts of stuff. So it'll just make it that much more believable. And then we have number 3, so the action. So once the trust has been established, the fraud actor will make that request. And this doesn't raise any red flags right away for the victim or the recipient, because they truly believe that this is a legitimate transaction and that communication is also legitimate. And then so that concludes sort of the flow of how business email compromises work, and something that we are seeing quite a bit here as a financial institution this year. So some of the types of business email compromise scams to look out for in 2024. First on my list, I have internal systems impersonation. So these will attack the IT teams, the HR teams, and other crucial internal teams to trick employees into clicking links. So these also involve those look-alike login pages. For example, an accountant might get an email that shows, maybe there's an action required on a recent invoice. You have to approve this invoice. You have to sign off on this invoice. And it'll ask the accountant to log in using their username and password for that accounting software. And of course, that page will be a cloned page. That accounting software can be downloaded or purchased by anybody. And if the fraud actor has the username and password, you're opening up those gates for them to have access. Number 2, another attack gaining momentum over the past year is called payloadless malware. So in these cases, you don't actually have to click on any links. For example, an email that doesn't include any links or attachments, but it may include a fake payment receipt. And it'll ask the recipient to call a specific phone number to stop the transaction or to reverse that transaction. When that recipient calls the phone number, they're connected to a call center, and then they're instructed they're given a downloadable file in order to cancel or reverse that transaction. And that file, of course, contains that malware. And then we have something called phishing, which I'll get into a little bit more detail later on in this presentation, but it's basically phishing through QR codes. And then we have vendor email compromise, so what we just spoke about, more specifically where your vendor is compromised and the fraudster is using their name to send you requests. Last but not least, AI-generated attacks. So AI is another component that is making these attacks harder to detect. So please make sure you're speaking to the right person. Make sure you're using the right phone number, or you're speaking to them in person if possible, before you go ahead and respond to any sort of request that involves providing confidential information or that involves a large sum of money. Okay, now that we know what these business email compromises are, how do we prevent from falling victim to them? So a successful business email compromise attack might cost businesses a lot of money, but it only takes a few simple steps to protect yourselves from these types of attacks. So number one on my list I have is protect your domain. So you can protect your domain name, so that email address that you use within your organization, with something that we call domain message authentication reporting, or a DMARC. So if anyone is using your domain name, or if anyone has created something similar to it, and the email address is not listed on your safe email address list, which you set up when you do obtain the service, that email address will be rejected and blocked, not only to the people within your organization, but also to your clients as well. Number two, we have anti-phishing protection. So you can use anti-phishing software that scans incoming emails for malicious links and attachments. And if it comes back as something suspicious, it'll either just remove it from the inbox or block that sender completely. And then we have segregation or separation of duties. So another very important step is to implement that segregation of duties so that one person is not doing more than two steps within the same transaction. So for example, if one person is updating account numbers, another person has to either approve the change or approve any transactions that happen in the future to that new account number. So just making sure that critical functions are not performed by one person alone, because this reduces the risk of an employee being coerced into performing unauthorized transactions. It adds adds another check stop, another set of eyes on the transaction. Number four, we have labeling external emails. So making sure that all external emails are labeled as external. You can set this up by adding a list of all of your trusted emails onto an internal list. I'll have more details on this step later, but there are tools available that will allow you to create that trusted list. And in the event that you get an email that's not on that trusted list, it will be labeled as external. So your employees will know to exercise a little bit more caution when it comes to those ones. Then you want to make sure you carefully examine the email address of the sender. So this is key. Also check to make sure that the email subject line contains information that's written in the email. So the subject line should match what's in the body or the message of that email. One thing to look for is spoofed email addresses. So sometimes fraudsters are tricky in that if they can't gain access to the victim's email inbox, they will create a lookalike email or a spoofed email address. And they'll replace letters with numbers to look like it's coming from the person that they're impersonating. So for example, Laura@atb.com could be disguised as Laura@atb.com, but the L would be replaced with either a number 1 or an uppercase I in order to look like it's actually coming from Laura@atb.com. So just be aware of these simple but key differences when responding to requests from anybody, be it your client, colleague, or vendor. Really anywhere that you're asked to take some sort of action, whether that's updating a password, updating account numbers, disclosing details, clicking on a link. If it calls for any sort of action, just make sure you're taking some of these steps. So verify the sender in person, over the phone, look for that email address change and things like that before you do go ahead and take action. And then educating your employees. So the best defense against business email compromise attack is employee education. So people of your organization need to be taught about the threat of business email compromises, how they work, how they can be targeted. They should also be aware of the company policies on business email usage and authorized email users if you have those in place. Spear phishing targets the people of your organization. It doesn't target the tools. So you just need to make sure that that human firewall of your organization is nice and strong, so that if your software or your hardware tools fail, then the people of your organization can be your strongest line of defense. I'll get into a little bit detail on this later on, but you may also want to consider implementing a policy that forces the people of your organization to confirm large transactions or changes to account numbers. using a medium other than email. So again, you can have that policy in place where the employee has to verify the change through a phone call, and you want to make sure that they're using a known legitimate company phone number and not the one in the email request. We've had a lot of clients that just pick up the phone and call the phone number that's written in the email, and they speak to the fraud actor unknowingly. They verify that those changes are quote unquote legitimate, and they go ahead and proceed with the changes. So verify face-to-face if that's possible, or again, by using a trusted phone number. You can use a phone number from the company website if it's a company that you worked with in the past. Okay, so moving on to some very surprising ways that I personally never thought we'd see. But like I said, there are many creative ways that fraud actors have designed to phish for information or to install malware or viruses onto your device. Some of the more common ones that we are seeing in today's day are, again, the phishing. So the QR code phishing. So when you go to a restaurant and they tell you to scan the QR code on the table or on the menu, just be very careful when you do this. This is a very creative way that fraudsters can phish you and get malware installed on your devices. Now, that's not to say all QR codes are suspicious, but you just want to make sure that any physical QR codes that you are scanning don't look like they've been tampered with. When you open your camera to scan that code, before you click on the link, there's a URL that will pop up. So read that URL, make sure that it lines up with what you're trying to open. If you're at a restaurant and the URL doesn't match up to the name of the restaurant, you can always ask for a paper menu. You also want to make sure that there isn't another sticker placed over the original one. There are also apps available that you can download that scan the QR code before you're directed to the link, and it'll filter out some of those malicious ones. But just generally try to avoid QR codes when you can. Like I said, if they're used properly, if you look for those red flags, it can be safe, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. Another method that I have on my screen here is known as juice jacking. So fraud actors are now getting malware onto devices through charging cables. So when you're at an airport or a hospital, if you see one of those free charging stations where you can leave your device in there for a little bit and lock the apartment, please do not use those. I would highly advise against using them. I would say only use charging cables that you own, that come with your device, or that you order through corporate websites or through reputable businesses like Staples or Best Buy. If you have an Apple iPhone, you want to buy the cable from Apple. Don't buy it secondhand. Don't borrow someone else's cable. These cables can be preloaded with malware. And all it takes is a simple plug into the wall and plug into your device, and that malware code is now deployed onto your device. It will silently suck all the information that you type onto your keyboard or your keypad, and it'll send it into the hands of the fraud actors. So we've heard stories of people who have purchased charging cables off of Facebook Marketplace, for example, and a few weeks later, their bank accounts are drained because those cables had preloaded malware on them. And that malware was sending everything that person was typing in back to the fraud actor. And then, of course, something that we should all be aware of are USB flash drives. So similar to charging cables, just make sure that they're purchased new from reputable companies, that your employees are not bringing their own USBs to use on devices that they might use to access your business work or organization from. Similar to this, if you're purchasing a secondhand laptop or a computer, just making sure that you scan it if you take it to a third-party IT company or somebody in-house if your organization has an IT specialist. Just having it scanned to make sure it's clean and free of any viruses before you go ahead and use it. As well, if an employee is leaving the organization and is returning a device, you want to make sure you clean that up before you reissue it to somebody else. And then, of course, we have connecting to an unsecure Wi-Fi network. So I do get into a little bit more detail later on. But you just want to make sure that, number one, your own Wi-Fis are secure. And number two, if you are connected to someone else's Wi-Fi, use that guest access if it's available, or just make sure you have the right security on your device in order to filter out that bad traffic, like virtual private networks or VPNs. And like I said, I'll get into a little bit more detail on that. But if you do end up connecting to a network that might have an infected device also connected to it, you do risk the chance of that malware or virus being sent to your device through that network as well. Similar to, like I said, your own connection. You want to make sure that you have some sort of network segmentation set up. So if you work out of an office or a shared office, and you have visitors or clients that come in to visit you, you want to make sure you set up a guest Wi-Fi. So what that does, again, is that if there's a contractor, for example, that comes in for an interview and they have an infected device and they connect to your work network, they can spread that virus onto other devices connected to that network. But if you have it segmented so that there's a guest Wi-Fi option available, that will limit the spread of that infection if they have something like that on their device. All right, so moving on to payment fraud. So payment fraud is a type of financial fraud that happens when someone intentionally uses false or stolen payment information to make a purchase. So for example, the most common payment fraud is that fraud actors will use stolen credit card information. They can also create fake checks using your account numbers, or they'll make unauthorized funds transfers, again, using stolen information. So you'd want to consider implementing payment-related fraud solutions if your business accepts credit card payments online, if you take payments over the phone, if you accept orders by email or by electronically, and if you take recurring payments from clients as well. So just as a little tidbit, it's predicted that by 2024, which we are in right now, e-commerce merchants will lose an estimated $24 billion to online payments in fraud. So that's big, big, big. So if you do have merchant services, whether it be through Moneris or other service providers, you want to make sure you know what options are available to you in terms of fraud protection when it comes to e-commerce and accepting payments electronically. I have on my screen a table that you can sort of take away and look at in a little bit more detail, but just to review your current coverage and what options might be available through your service provider. So at the top here, the first on my list, the tool that we have is basic verification. So this is through CVV, or the numbers on the back of your credit card or the customer's credit card. So this is a very basic authentication process because anyone that has the physical card on hand can pass this verification. So when a purchaser goes to complete the transaction, they're asked for that 3-digit code on the back of their card for authentication purposes. Further down on the list, we have AVS, or address verification, which means that the purchaser must put in their CVV, so that card verification value, as well as their full address, including postal code. And that address is sent back to the issuing bank of that credit card, and that bank has to verify that information. If it doesn't match what the bank has for that client, that transaction will be declined. Further down, we have something called real-time response authentication. So this is more of a comprehensive suite of tools that uses artificial intelligence and something that we call machine learning in order to approve or decline transactions. And it's based on a number of things, like the risk that your business is willing to accept, the customer's behavior in the past, and other options that you can customize and set up according to your business needs. And then last but not least, we have something that we call 3D Secure 2.0. If you have this option, it's basically like two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication for online purchases. So if a person tries to put a transaction through over a certain dollar value, maybe with a new device, it will ask them for that two-factor authentication code, which will be sent to their email address or their phone number on file with the bank. And what that does is it adds an extra layer of security, and it also shifts a lot of the liability to the issuing banks of the credit cards being used in the event that there's a financial loss or a fraud claim that happens using these 3D secure methods. So in a nutshell, just making sure that you know what's available to you if you are a business that uses online payments as a part of your operations. These tools can help you mitigate some of the risks that come with those chargebacks and those fraud claims, as well, just to generally streamline and make the client experience or the purchaser experience a little bit smoother. Moving on to another type of payment fraud is check fraud. So I was really hoping that by 2024, I wouldn't have to be talking about this. But the truth is that checks are still very widely used, and I don't see that they will be going away anytime soon. So check fraud happens when a fraud actor will alter a legitimate check or will create a completely falsified check in order to scam individuals for access to their funds. So how does check fraud happen? Check fraud can happen if the wrong person has a copy of your check or even has your account number. So we are seeing a lot of mail theft cases in which our clients are sending out check payments and the mail is stolen, giving fraud actors access to their check templates, their signatures on the check, and the account number. Of course, other ways that clients can fall victim are internal fraud. So if you have a disgruntled employee or somebody within the organization that has access to your checks and is given the opportunity to conduct fraud. We have misappropriated checks, multiple deposits, which are checks that are just deposited multiple times using online deposit. And then we have counterfeit checks, which are simply fake checks altogether. So how do we prevent it? Use security check features. Some checks have the options, or some financial institutions have options for their checks to have holograms or logos that you can see when you hold the checks up to the light. You want to make sure you monitor your check orders. So if you do order checks, make sure you get them on time, make sure you track them. And if you don't, you want to report it to your financial institution as soon as possible so that all those checks can be stopped, or you reopen a new account with a new account number, or whatever next steps you have to take in order to mitigate the risk of someone else using those checks. You want to maintain physical security. So use deposit slips, for example, so that you have sort of a paper trail of where each check has gone. It's a little bit easier to reconcile your accounts using these slips. You want to make sure you secure the checks in a safe place, make sure they're locked, nobody has access to them. And then again, that segregation of duties and the limiting the signers comes into place. So making sure that someone who approves an invoice isn't the same one who's writing the check, and just implement internal controls similar to this line of thought. Something that some of our clients have been doing is to have one checking account which is used only for checks. And that way, if you do fall victim to check fraud, instead of having to close your main operating account and going through the entire process of moving all of your payments over to a new one, you just have to close that one checking account and reopen it without impacting too much of your day-to-day business operations. One thing that's very, very important is reconciling daily. So making sure you look at your accounts so that you can let us know as soon as possible whenever you see something suspicious. We will always try to recover your funds for you in the event you do fall victim to check fraud. But just keep in mind that Payments Canada has set specific time limitations in which financial institutions are able to return checks. So the sooner you let us know, the better the chances are of recovering your funds. You want to always immediately notify us, like I said, but if you see anything suspicious, something you don't recognize, just give your relationship manager a call. And then the easiest way to do it is to opt for electronic payments altogether. So reduce the use of checks, opt for those wire payments, direct deposits, pre-authorized payments instead. And this is because the money comes directly from the payer and it is credited directly into the account of the payee. And the account number of that recipient must match what you put on the sender's end. So moving on, how to be proactive about fraud and cybercrime in general. A lot of organizations don't pay attention to fraud until it's too late. So just make sure you have that proactive component in your plan. The points on my screen are something you can do in order to make sure you're prepared. So for example, being skeptical. It might sound very basic and elementary, but if you're getting an offer of maybe an investment that's too good to be true, it probably is. So just questioning everything, having a healthy level of paranoia when you're engaging in business activities, when you're talking to new people, when you're conducting transactions. Knowing your business, so just know the people, know the ins and outs of the processes that you have in place, know how your employees work, what their day-to-day jobs are, how they initiate transaction, and all that sort of information. And then to add to that, know your customers and your suppliers. So do research with those that you work with or that you will engage in business with. Know their reputation. Identify areas. So take some of the risks that we discussed today, write them down. Talk about how can fraudsters access your accounts? How are you vulnerable to some of the attack methods that we spoke about today? Write down those vulnerabilities, match them up with the tools that might be available to you. And then the rest I'll touch quickly on my slide, but just know what's happening out there. Which companies have fallen victim to cyber attacks? How has that happened? Because this might help you identify some of your vulnerabilities as a business as well. So just to get into a little bit more detail on those steps, number one on my list here is securing your network. So you want to make sure you invest in reputable firewalls, both hardware and software. You want to make sure you have anti-malware, spyware detection, and that you are using them on all devices that are used in your organization. You want to make sure you're backing up your devices on a regular basis. If you choose to use a virtually hosted desktop, this can be skipped and it'll save you a lot of time, but I'll talk a little bit about that the virtual desktops in a minute. Don't access your banking from just any device. Make sure it's a trusted device. It'll reduce the risk of fraudsters accessing your account in the event that the device you're using is infected. And again, educate your staff. So have the annual training, have those conversations, open up those channels so that they're comfortable asking questions. And then some of the other items I have on my list here are easy tools that you can implement. We do have a cybersecurity toolkit that is very easy to read. It goes through some of these tools in detail. So again, I do have the link at the end of my slide deck here that I will show you at the end of this presentation. This is very, very important. So invest in the right people, tools, and training. So again, it ties in with education. Create that culture of cybersecurity awareness, educate your employees, have a formal reporting mechanism in place. So if your employees do happen to fall victim to a cyber attack, they know what steps to take. And then, of course, hiring the right people by doing background checks, because internal fraud is big and it can get out of hand because it is hard to identify. You want to make sure you have a policy in place in which your employees are using good password hygiene and they know how to set strong passwords. There's a great resource that I have on the slide deck which outlines the steps to take to have secure passwords. It might sound very beginner, but just making sure that it's a part of the employee training, because sometimes when you repeat something too much, kind of slips through the cracks. So just making sure that you refresh them with that information and knowledge, and that they know the risks of setting weak passwords. So consider a hosted virtual desktop. So what this does is it places your desktop on the cloud, making it harder for fraud actors to access information that's on your cloud. So your employees can access what they need from anywhere. Resources can easily be shared across multiple devices, and your information is always backed up. If your device is infected with malware, it might help mitigate some of the risks associated with that as well. So if you plug in an infected USB drive or charging cable, and it deploys malware onto the device, having a virtual desktop might help limit the spread to the information on the cloud. And it might just be limited to information contained on the actual device. And again, protect that information that's stored on the cloud. So lots of service providers out there that offer these virtual desktops as a service. Cyber insurance is another component of a strong cybersecurity posture in today's day, and with the way that things are going in the cyber threat landscape. Having cyber insurance can help you with costs related to cyber attacks, such as remediation. It can assist in responding to security breaches. Overall, it's a great thing to have. I would suggest that at the very least, organizations do a little bit of research on what type of coverage is out there, how it could protect your organization, and just to learn a little bit more about cyber insurance in general to see if it's the right fit for you and your business. In the event that you do fall victim to cyber attack, and you're unable to recover funds for whatever reason, cyber insurance may be able to help with coverage on that front. Something that we're working on at ATB is engaging with third-party insurance providers to make cyber insurance potentially available as an option to our clients as well. So stay tuned for that in the future. And okay, talking about how to survive a cyber attack, just to kind of summarize everything that we've talked about today. So you want to be proactive. Don't wait to fall victim to a cyber attack before you start thinking about the solutions and controls that you want to implement. So identify the threats. So create maybe a shared spreadsheet. Have the key players of your organization just jot down some of the risks that you might have when it comes to cybersecurity. So some questions to ask yourself are, do you have the right fraud education in place within your organization? Do your employees know how to report phishing emails? Do they know how to spot red flags? Do you have those segregation of duties in place? Do you have some workflow approvals in place? So users that have access to online banking, can they conduct large wire transfers or large EFT transfers without a second person's approval? So these are all things you should be thinking of and asking yourself when it comes to identifying risks. If you have the capacity, you can also hire a third-party company to complete a risk assessment. At the end of this deck, I have a great resource for from the Canadian Centre of Cybersecurity, which are just baseline controls that small to medium-sized businesses should have in place in order to have a strong cybersecurity posture. And I've said it again and again, but educate your employees, the people of your organizations, whether they be volunteers, temp workers, contractors, permanent employees. Anybody that has access to your systems, even for a short period of time, should be educated on fraud. We actually have a great anti-fraud expert training program that we're offering to our clients for free that you can use. It has some really easy to understand short videos on fraud in general and how to safeguard yourself from things like phishing emails. So you'll find that link at the end of this deck. Another part of education is to create a response plan. So you want to make sure that your employees know how to report things like phishing emails. If they fall victim to one of these, make sure they know what steps to take, who they need to reach out to. Again, lots of great resources on the Canadian Centre of Cybersecurity that can help walk you through the steps of creating that incident response plan. And then finally, learning about the tools that are available. So protect your people and your devices before you fall victim. That cybersecurity toolkit I mentioned is a great place to start. Cyber insurance is also something you should consider. And just knowing what tools are out there in order to protect your business will help you get a jump start to all of this. Then if you've already fallen victim, you want to make sure that you notify your financial institution immediately, just in case a fraud actor gains access to your bank accounts, your email accounts, anything of that nature. You want to make sure you notify an IT specialist, whether that be external IT company or someone that you have hired in-house. The reason for this is, again, they want to make sure they clean out your devices and just making sure that there's no viruses or malware that have been deployed onto the devices and reduce that further risk. You might want to consider contacting local law enforcement to let them know about the situation. They can't always do something, but the more they know, the more pieces to the puzzle that they have. So it's always best to let them know as well. Making sure you reach out to the credit reporting agencies like Equifax or TransUnion, because if you have given away personal information, fraud actors can use that information in many different ways for many years to come. And then again, just reassessing those internal controls. So where was that loophole? How did the fraud actor gain access? And what can we do to change that and to close that gap in the future? So just to close off, I do want to ask a question to you. The question is, knowing what you know now, do you feel like there are some steps outlined today that you will take away and implement? If you want to share how you're feeling after this webinar, I just encourage you to drop a note with some feedback or the answer to this question in the chat, and we can review those later. But that's it for me. Thanks again for being here and for being committed to learning about fraud. If there's any additional information you'd like to learn about, you can reach out to your relationship manager. We'd be more than happy to assist. As promised, I'm leaving you with some great resources here that include that free anti-fraud expert training, that cybersecurity toolkit, lots of great online webinars, how to develop those internal controls, those baselines for cybersecurities, and other things just to help you get ahead of the game, whether you're trying to review the security controls you already have in place, or you're just starting to think about having a better cybersecurity posture overall. So I'm going to pass it back to Fallon now to bring up some of the questions that might have popped up in the chat. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation, Aisha. There were so many great learnings. I think for me, one major takeaway I had was on QR codes at restaurants, because ever since COVID, I've used those all the time and I don't even think twice about it. So I will definitely be doing a double take before I scan next time. So
Awesome.
yeah, great one there. And I see that there was lots of feedback in the chat. From others who had similar experiences or took away some really great things for today. So let's get to a few questions. The first is actually a comment from Justin, but I think a great conversation piece. Justin mentioned that they've had emails from scammers pretending to be business executives before, and that the person that they were impersonating only started a week before the attack. So I was just wondering, Aisha, if there were any tips or pieces you wanted to re-highlight on kind of those impersonation attacks or individuals acting as CEOs.
Yeah, absolutely. So fraud actors will always look for those vulnerable moments. So they'll look for newer employees that don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the business. They will look for, for example, accountants that have gone on vacation or just coming back from vacation. And again, they'll find all that information through social media. So this executive may have posted on their LinkedIn about starting a new job, or that accountant that went on vacation might have had it plastered all over her social media accounts. So that's also another thing to be aware of, is to restrict that usage of social media within your organization. It sounds very micromanaging, but again, in these types of situations, it can go a long way. So in that, in the resources, I actually have linked something that helps you implement policies that restrict that information. Because again, those fraud actors will look at any virtual record that's available on anybody within that organization. But yes, again, if it's an email coming from somebody that's higher up within your company or a company that you've worked with in the past, asking you to take some sort of action. We've seen everything from, purchase these gift cards for me to send a wire of, $2-3 million. Just make sure when you see that call to action that you're verifying that the request is coming from the right person. But thanks for sharing, Justin.
Yes, thank you, Justin. Another question here from Bonnie. How are day-to-day antivirus tools different from in-person device scans?
That's a great question. So day-to-day antivirus tools are great on a surface level monitoring. In-person device scans are comprehensive. So what the scans will actually do is they will go into the registers that are deeply embedded within your devices, and they will look for malwares embedded within the registries of your device, whereas the day-to-day ones, again, are more of a surface level scan. The reason why we say in-person comprehensive device scans is because there are a lot of phishing campaigns out there that look like they're comprehensive device scans online, but by clicking on the links or talking to the person on over the phone, you're actually speaking to a fraudster, and they deploy malware onto your device rather than extract it. So in-person comprehensive device scans, again, are always very important. We love to say 6 months to a year, all the devices be scanned within your organization. If somebody's leaving the organization and returning a device, make sure you scan that before you give it out. For buying secondhand devices, make sure you do that as well. But just keeping it as a regular practice is the best way to go. Thanks for that question, Bonnie.
Yeah, another great question. One of our colleagues here at ATV was actually talking about Facebook Marketplace or similar sites like Kijiji, and wondering about financial info and if they should worry about that when they're sending an e-transfer. Earlier, I know you were talking about, Aisha, buying secondhand laptops or secondhand devices and then bringing them into your organization, but do you have any thoughts on e-transfers and as a business owner or personally, and when to use them and when to not?
Absolutely. So the best way to go is to set up auto deposit if you're receiving funds, of course, but if you are sending them, making sure that answer to the security question is something that only you would know. So, this, what color is the sky, what's the last letter of the alphabet. Please do not use those phrases, because we have had a lot of cases where, a recipient's email inbox has been hacked, and there's a fraudster just hanging out in there waiting for something good to come along, and then they suddenly see that notification of e-transfer funds coming in. They click on that deposit link and they redirect the funds to their bank account, because the question is, what color is the sky, or what country do we live in, that type of thing. So make sure it's an answer that only you know, and then give the seller a call and tell them what that answer is. But again, if they're set up for auto deposit, if used correctly, that is the safest way to go.
Awesome. That's so great to know. Something I will be keeping in mind personally as well. Catherine here with another great question. Given that check fraud and digital fraud is on the rise, are EMTs still safe, Aisha?
That's a great question. They are, when used correctly. So again, EFTs are safe because you are entering the recipient's details into that submission screen. So you're entering exactly which account number the funds are going to, what the name on the account number is. Whereas for checks, really, you just write the name and anybody could deposit it into any account. No, where EMTs and EFTs become a preferred method of financial transaction is when fraudsters gain access to your account, right? So anything can be used, whether it's EFT, EMT, it doesn't make them vulnerable. It just means that you're giving the fraudster access to use those tools on your behalf. So again, making sure you're protecting that username, that password, that two-factor authentication code. You've got to lock up your house, because it's like an alarm system. I always say, if you have the latest and greatest alarm system, security system on your home, but you give away the keys to your door and you give away that code to your security system, it doesn't mean that that alarm system is any less. It just means you've given away the code to the fraud actors. So again, EFTs, EMTs are not vulnerable by any means. It's just the fact that we are giving fraud actors access to use those as tools to funnel out the funds that we have in our accounts.
Wonderful. That is a great analogy. One last question from me. What is ATB doing to safeguard clients from cloned login websites? We're talking about that a little bit earlier. And is there a way to shut them down?
That's a great question. So we do work with third-party cybersecurity vendors who help us initiate takedown and who monitor the web to find any cloned websites or websites that are pretending to be ATB Financial. Unfortunately, we don't have control over what domains are purchased or what websites are created. So there might be some that slip through the cracks, but we are working closely with search engines like Google, Yahoo, AOL, and our third-party cybersecurity vendors in order to bring those down as soon as possible. I think there's been some recent developments with Google as well, some great partnerships with them that helps us sort of keep a little bit more of a transparent monitoring on that front.
Awesome. Well, I think before we do log off here, Aisha just wanted to show some comments that this has been really helpful for a lot of individuals. And I think this has just been a really great presentation today. And do you have any closing thoughts before we log off?
No, just thanks again for your time and your commitment to educating yourselves and your organization on fraud in general, and do take advantage of that free expert anti-fraud training that we have. Feel free to distribute to anybody in your organization, friends, family, neighbors, anybody that you can, and help us spread the word. But thanks again for your time. And if there's any questions that we weren't able to get to, just feel free to reach out to your relationship manager and they can be in touch with me that way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aisha. And thank you everyone for joining today. I did see a couple of questions in the chat wondering if the links and information and resources would be provided. And the answer is absolutely 100% yes. We will be sending out an email and a recording with the presentation in that email, with all of the resources linked in that email. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you everyone again for joining today. And we hope you have a wonderful day.